The late 12th century was a period of relentless struggle between the Christian crusaders and the Muslim forces of the Near East, a time marked by fierce battles, shifting alliances, and the clash of cultures that would shape the history of the Holy Land for centuries. Among the most legendary of these conflicts was the Third Crusade, launched in 1189, a campaign sparked by the shocking capture of Jerusalem by the formidable Muslim leader Saladin in 1187. The loss of Jerusalem sent waves of shock and indignation through Europe, compelling King Richard I of England, famously known as Richard the Lionheart, to respond with unparalleled resolve. His aim was not only to reclaim the Holy City, but also to restore the honor of Christendom and reassert the influence of European powers in the Levant. It was during this campaign that the stage was set for one of the most dramatic and decisive confrontations of the Crusades, the Battle of Arsuf. The march toward Arsuf was far from straightforward. Richard and his forces had to navigate a landscape fraught with danger and uncertainty. The Crusaders, numbering around 15,000 men, were composed of a mixture of professional knights, seasoned soldiers, and less experienced infantry. Despite their training and valor, they faced the immense challenge of moving through hostile territory while maintaining cohesion and morale. The route from Acre, which the Crusaders had previously captured after a grueling siege, to Jaffa, a vital coastal city, was especially perilous. The terrain was rugged, dotted with hills, valleys, and narrow passes, which Saladin's forces could exploit to stage ambushes and harass the marching army. Moreover, the searing Mediterranean sun and the need to carry provisions placed additional strain on the Crusader troops, testing their endurance even before the battle had begun. Saladin, for his part, was a master of strategy and psychological warfare. The Muslim forces he commanded were formidable, numbering around 30,000 men, a mix of cavalry, archers, and lightly armed infantry. He was acutely aware of the Crusaders' vulnerabilities, particularly their dependence on tight formations and the psychological impact of prolonged harassment. Saladin's strategy during the march to Arsuf was to continuously pressure Richard's army, using mobile cavalry units to strike and retreat, forcing the Crusaders to react defensively. This tactic aimed not only to inflict casualties, but also to disrupt supply lines, exhaust the troops, and create an opening for a decisive strike. Every hill, every grove, and every winding path became a potential trap where the enemy could be isolated and destroyed. Richard, however, was no ordinary opponent. His reputation as a warrior king was well earned, and his understanding of battlefield dynamics was profound. Recognizing the danger posed by Saladin's constant harassment, Richard implemented strict marching protocols. The Crusader army was divided into 3 primary divisions, each responsible for maintaining its position and protecting the flanks of the column. Rearguard units, composed of the most experienced knights, were tasked with repelling attacks from Saladin's skirmishers, while the vanguard pushed forward cautiously, ensuring that the army remained cohesive and responsive. This meticulous organization was crucial, for a single lapse in discipline could lead to chaos and catastrophic losses. The psychological dimension of this march cannot be understated. Both armies were acutely aware of the stakes. For Richard and the Crusaders, each step forward represented a mixture of hope and dread, hope for victory and the reclamation of Jerusalem, dread of ambush, and the relentless prowess of Saladin's forces. For Saladin, every day of harassment served to wear down the enemy, testing their resolve and demonstrating the superiority of his tactical acumen. Reports from chroniclers of the time describe an army constantly under pressure, with dust swirling from the march, the rhythmic clatter of hooves, the occasional flare of arrows, and the tense anticipation of a larger confrontation. Every sound and movement had to be interpreted with caution, for misjudgment could mean death for the unwary. Beyond the immediate tactical considerations, the broader political and religious context played a significant role in setting the stage for Arsuf. The Third Crusade was not merely a military endeavor, it was a moral and spiritual crusade in the eyes of its participants. The Crusaders viewed themselves as agents of divine will, tasked with reclaiming holy lands and punishing those who had seized them. This religious fervor imbued Richard's army with a sense of purpose, driving them to endure the hardships of the march and to prepare for the decisive battle that loomed on the horizon. Saladin, too, understood the symbolic importance of the conflict. His defense of Jerusalem was not only a military objective but also a rallying point for Muslim forces throughout the region, further intensifying the significance of the forthcoming clash. As the Crusader army approached Arsuf, the terrain itself began to influence the preparations for battle. The area around Arsuf was strategically located along the coastal plain, with the sea on one side and hills and forests on the other. This configuration offered both opportunities and dangers. Richard could use the coastline to protect his flank and ensure a stable supply line from the sea, but the proximity of hills and wooded areas provided Saladin with potential staging points for ambushes. The careful selection of encampments, observation posts, and defensive positions became paramount. Scouts were deployed, and signals were established to coordinate responses to sudden attacks. Every decision in this prelude was a test of foresight, leadership, and the ability to anticipate the enemy's moves. Despite the pressures and the constant threat of attack, the Crusaders maintained remarkable discipline. The orderliness of their march reflected not only Richard's command, but also the training and loyalty of his knights. This discipline was a critical factor in preparing the army for the confrontation that would follow. Richard knew that the moment of engagement would demand precise coordination and unwavering courage, and he used the march as both a trial and a teaching ground. Troops learned to respond to attacks, maintain formation, and trust their leaders, creating a psychological readiness that would prove decisive in the coming battle. In the final analysis, the stage at Arsuf was set by a combination of geography, strategy, psychology, and leadership. The relentless march of Richard's army along the Mediterranean coast, the constant probing of Saladin's forces, the careful deployment of troops, and the psychological preparation of the men all converged to create a crucible in which the Battle of Arsuf would be fought. It was a moment when preparation met opportunity, when discipline confronted chaos, and when the leadership of one man would shape the outcome of history. The prelude to Arsuf was, in many ways, as dramatic and crucial as the battle itself, for it demonstrated the intricate interplay of tactics, terrain, and human will that defines the art of war. By the time the Crusaders reached the vicinity of Arsuf, both armies were poised for confrontation. Saladin's forces had tested the patience and endurance of Richard's men, while Richard had molded his army into a disciplined, responsive force, capable of exploiting any weakness. The stage was set, the combatants were ready, and history was about to witness one of the most remarkable episodes of the Third Crusade, a clash that would see 30,000 of Saladin's soldiers meet the might and strategy of Richard the Lionheart in a battle lasting just 17 minutes. The Battle of Arsuf was not just a meeting of two armies, it was a collision of contrasting military philosophies, disciplined preparation versus fluid maneuvering, and the raw power of armored knights against the nimble speed of mounted archers. Before the first clash of swords, both Richard the Lionheart and Saladin meticulously analyzed the terrain, the strengths of their forces, and the weaknesses of their opponent. Understanding the composition, strategy, and battlefield psychology of both armies is essential to appreciating how a smaller, highly disciplined Crusader army managed to confront and overcome Saladin's 30,000-strong force in a remarkably brief engagement. Richard's army, numbering roughly 15,000, was a diverse mixture of seasoned knights, mounted infantry, and foot soldiers from across Europe. The knights, heavily armored and highly trained in close combat, were the elite striking force. They were supported by men-at-arms, archers, and infantry, who together formed the backbone of the Crusader army. Each unit had a specific role: knights to deliver shock charges, infantry to hold positions and provide defensive depth, and archers to harass and disrupt the enemy at range. Richard understood the importance of maintaining the cohesion of this multi-tiered army, especially while marching through hostile territory where Saladin's forces could strike unpredictably. In contrast, Saladin's army was larger, numbering around 30,000 men, composed predominantly of light cavalry, horse archers, and a smaller contingent of infantry. Unlike the Crusaders, who relied on heavy armor and disciplined formations, Saladin's forces excelled in mobility and ranged warfare. His cavalry could move swiftly across the terrain, launch devastating arrow volleys, and retreat before the Crusaders could respond effectively. This flexibility allowed Saladin to execute a strategy of harassment and attrition, continuously attacking the Crusader column to inflict casualties, disrupt supplies, and test their discipline. His forces were also adept at psychological warfare, creating a sense of constant threat that wore down morale over time. The composition of the two armies dictated their formations on the battlefield. Richard, aware of the danger posed by Saladin's cavalry, placed his army in a long, narrow column during the march, with the sea to the west serving as a natural protective flank. The army was divided into three main divisions: the vanguard, the center, and the rearguard. Each division had clearly defined responsibilities, and communication between them was maintained through signals, runners, and prearranged drills. The rear in particular was crucial, as it bore the brunt of Saladin's repeated attacks. Richard positioned his most experienced knights in the rearguard to respond swiftly to skirmishes and prevent the army from being broken apart. This formation allowed the Crusaders to maintain a defensive posture while keeping the option to launch a counterattack when the moment was right. Saladin, by contrast, employed a more fluid and dynamic formation designed to exploit the Crusaders' reliance on heavy armor and rigid organization. His cavalry was divided into small, highly mobile units that could strike independently, create distractions, and retreat without sustaining significant losses. Horse archers would ride in loose formations, showering the Crusaders with arrows and forcing them to maintain tight defensive ranks. These hit-and-run tactics were intended to exhaust Richard's forces gradually, both physically and mentally, creating an opportunity for a decisive attack once the Crusaders showed signs of fatigue or disarray. Saladin's strategy reflected a deep understanding of asymmetrical warfare, using mobility, speed, and psychological pressure to counter the brute force of a disciplined but slower-moving enemy. As the armies approached the coastal plain near Arsuf, both commanders had to consider the terrain carefully. The plain was bordered by the Mediterranean Sea on one side and hills and forests on the other. For Richard, the coastline provided a secure flank and an avenue for resupply by sea, but the proximity of hills allowed Saladin to stage ambushes and launch attacks from unexpected angles. Maintaining cohesion and vigilance was critical. Scouts were sent ahead and to the flanks to monitor enemy movements, while signaling systems were established to ensure that the divisions of the Crusader army could respond rapidly to threats. Every step, every adjustment in formation, and every command had to be executed flawlessly to prevent the army from being fragmented and isolated. The psychological component of the battlefield was equally significant. Richard's men were aware that they faced an army twice their size, yet they were motivated by their faith, loyalty to their king, and belief in the righteousness of their mission. The Crusaders understood that discipline, timing, and unity could overcome numerical inferiority. Saladin, on the other hand, relied on constant pressure to create doubt and fear. Archers would rain arrows on exposed units, cavalry would feint attacks to draw out countercharges, and small cavalry squads would attempt to penetrate gaps in the Crusader line. This combination of stress, fatigue, and the threat of sudden attack tested the nerves of even the most experienced soldiers. Richard's genius lay in his understanding of timing and restraint. Despite repeated provocations from Saladin's forces, he refrained from ordering a full-scale charge prematurely. A single rash move could have shattered his army or played into Saladin's hands. Instead, Richard maintained the army's formation and allowed his men to absorb the harassment while keeping morale high. The knights in the rearguard executed disciplined defensive maneuvers, countering enemy charges without breaking formation. Infantry units provided steady support, shielding vulnerable points and ensuring that the army remained cohesive. This combination of patience, discipline, and readiness to exploit the right moment demonstrated Richard's exceptional command skills. The stage was further complicated by the interplay between different arms of the military. Crusader archers had to maintain a delicate balance, providing suppressive fire without exposing themselves to Saladin's swift cavalry. Knights had to be ready for sudden charges, but avoid being lured into traps. Infantry had to maintain the structural integrity of the army, holding gaps and preventing panic from spreading. Communication and trust between units were paramount. Richard's ability to inspire confidence and maintain order under pressure was critical in transforming a potentially precarious march into a controlled approach to the battlefield. As the armies neared Arsuf, both commanders were acutely aware that the engagement could be decisive. The Crusaders, though fewer in number, had advantages in discipline, heavy armor, and the ability to deliver concentrated shock attacks. Saladin, with his superior numbers and mobility, relied on attrition, harassment, and psychological pressure to offset the Crusaders' strengths. Each force's strategy reflected the experience, culture, and battlefield philosophy of its leader. Richard's methodical preparation, defensive formations, and emphasis on timing would ultimately allow him to channel the army's strengths at the critical moment. Saladin's flexibility, rapid mobility, and psychological tactics, while formidable, would be met with a combination of restraint and sudden, overwhelming force that the Crusaders had carefully cultivated in the march to Arsuf. By the time the two armies lined up for battle, the contrast could not have been starker. On one side, a disciplined, well-organized force of heavily armored knights, ready to strike with devastating impact. On the other, a larger, highly mobile army skilled in harassment, archery, and rapid maneuvers. The battle formations, terrain considerations, and psychological strategies of both armies created a tense, high-stakes confrontation. Every movement, every signal, and every decision would shape the outcome of the coming clash, setting the stage for one of the most remarkable tactical displays of the Third Crusade. In conclusion, the forces at Arsuf were a study in contrasts: heavy versus light, discipline versus mobility, patience versus opportunism. Richard's careful organization and steadfast leadership allowed a smaller army to withstand continuous attacks and remain cohesive, while Saladin's relentless harassment and psychological pressure tested the limits of endurance and courage. The meticulous attention to formations, strategy, and battlefield psychology ensured that when the decisive moment arrived, Richard's army was not only prepared, but positioned to exploit the enemy's vulnerabilities, leading to a stunning victory that would resonate throughout history. The Battle of Arsuf is remembered not just for its brevity, but for the brilliance of command displayed by Richard the Lionheart in the 17 minutes that changed the course of the Third Crusade. While the preceding march had tested discipline, endurance, and morale, the moment of reckoning was when strategy, timing, and courage converged. In this short span, Richard's army transformed from a disciplined marching force into an unstoppable offensive, demonstrating how meticulous preparation and battlefield intuition could overcome superior numbers. To understand the significance of this decisive engagement, it is essential to examine Richard's tactical genius, the execution of the Crusader charge, and the factors that allowed 15,000 men to rout a much larger army of 30,000 under Saladin's command. For much of the march along the coastal plain, Saladin's forces had employed relentless harassment. His cavalry and horse archers repeatedly attacked the Crusader column, showering arrows from a distance, charging briefly, and then withdrawing before the Crusaders could respond effectively. This tactic was intended to exhaust the men, disrupt cohesion, and force an opening for a decisive strike. The Crusaders, though disciplined, faced constant fatigue, and the psychological pressure of repeated attacks could eroded their morale. At this critical juncture, many commanders might have reacted impulsively, ordering a premature charge that could have fragmented their forces and played into Saladin's hands. Richard, however, exercised remarkable restraint. He recognized that a hasty counterattack would be disastrous, given the terrain, enemy mobility, and numerical disadvantage. Instead, he maintained the army's formation, keeping the knights ready in the rearguard and ensuring that the infantry held the flanks and center. This patience allowed him to control the timing and location of the decisive engagement. Richard's understanding of when to act was as crucial as the action itself. By delaying the charge, he allowed his forces to absorb harassment without bria. King, conserving strength and cohesion for the critical moment when the enemy's vulnerabilities could be exploited fully. The decisive moment arrived near Arsuf, where the terrain provided a clear field for cavalry charges while limiting the ability of Saladin's mobile units to retreat effectively. Richard observed the positioning of enemy units and noted the signs of fatigue and overextension in Saladin's forces. Some of the Muslim cavalry had been drawn too far from the main formation, creating exploitable gaps. Others had slowed their harassment to conserve energy, presenting an opportunity for a concentrated blow. Richard gave the signal, and the Crusader knights, disciplined and battle-ready, moved forward with precision. The timing was flawless, a single coordinated thrust against the enemy's weakened points rather than a scattered or reactive charge. Richard's tactical genius was evident in the coordination of his forces during this critical engagement. The knights advanced in a wedge formation designed to concentrate shock and penetrate enemy lines. This formation, combined with the momentum of the charge, allowed them to break through Saladin's cavalry in localized areas, creating chaos and opening the path for infantry and supporting units to follow. Archers from the Crusader army provided covering fire, targeting enemy units attempting to regroup or flank. The combination of speed, armor, and coordinated support magnified the impact of the assault, allowing a smaller force to exert disproportionate force on the battlefield. Another key element of Richard's strategy was the exploitation of enemy psychology. Saladin's forces had relied on continuous harassment to induce fatigue and panic, but the sudden and overwhelming Crusader charge shattered this psychological advantage. The appearance of heavily armored knights surging forward at full speed with disciplined infantry following in lockstep created confusion and fear. Units that had been confident in their mobility suddenly found themselves trapped or overpowered. Panic spread quickly, particularly among units that had been overstretched or isolated during the preceding skirmishes. Richard understood that morale was as important as physical force, and his timing ensured that the enemy's cohesion would collapse almost immediately. The brevity of the engagement, 17 minutes, was a testament to the efficiency of Richard's tactical execution. In that short span, the Crusaders exploited every advantage: discipline, timing, momentum, terrain, and psychological pressure. The enemy, despite numerical superiority, could not recover from the concentrated shock of the attack. Soldiers fled in disarray, formations collapsed, and Saladin was forced to withdraw to preserve the remnants of his army. The precision and decisiveness of the Crusader assault prevented a prolonged battle, minimizing casualties on Richard's side while maximizing the strategic and psychological impact of the victory. Richard's leadership during these critical moments cannot be overstated. He did not merely command from the rear, he led from the front, inspiring confidence and demonstrating courage. His personal presence on the battlefield reinforced discipline and motivated his troops to maintain cohesion despite the danger and exhaustion of the march. Chronicles of the time describe Richard as calm, decisive, and commanding, issuing orders with clarity and ensuring that every unit understood its role in the unfolding engagement. This combination of personal bravery and strategic foresight exemplified the qualities of a great military leader. The outcome of the 17-minute engagement also underscores the importance of integrating combined arms in medieval warfare. Richard effectively synchronized the act. Ions of knights, infantry, and archers. Cavalry delivered shock, infantry maintained the line and prevented encirclement, and archers suppressed enemy reinforcements. This integrated approach amplified the impact of each unit and created a force multiplier effect, allowing a numerically smaller army to defeat a larger one. It demonstrated that tactical coordination rather than sheer numbers alone could determine the outcome of a battle. Furthermore, Richard's ability to read the battlefield in real time played a pivotal role. Unlike many commanders who relied on rigid preset plans, Richard adapted to the movements of Saladin's forces, waiting for the precise moment when enemy gaps and weaknesses aligned with his army's strengths. This dynamic decision-making contrasted sharply with Saladin's reliance on harassment and mobility, which, while effective in the long march, proved vulnerable to a sudden, concentrated blow. Richard's timing, combined with the disciplined execution of his forces, converted preparation into immediate, decisive action. In historical context, the moment of reckoning at Arsuf stands as a masterclass in tactical warfare. The battle illustrates how patience, preparation, timing, and leadership can overcome numerical inferiority. Richard's ability to withstand harassment, maintain morale, and deliver a sudden, overwhelming strike highlights the principles of command that are studied in military academies even today. The 17-minute engagement transformed a challenging march into a decisive victory, securing the Crusader flank, boosting morale, and demonstrating the potency of disciplined, well-led forces against larger adversaries. In conclusion, the moment of reckoning at the Battle of Arsuf was a convergence of strategic brilliance, battlefield discipline, and personal leadership. Richard the Lionheart's tactical genius manifested in patience, timing, formation, and morale management allowed a smaller army to crush a larger, experienced force in a brief but decisive engagement. The lessons of Arsuf extend beyond medieval warfare: the importance of preparation, the coordination of diverse forces, the exploitation of enemy vulnerabilities, and the decisive impact of leadership under pressure remain relevant in the study of military history. In just 17 minutes, Richard transformed potential vulnerability into victory, turning the Battle of Arsuf into a testament to the enduring power of strategy and command. The Battle of Arsuf, fought on September 7, 1191, stands as one of the most decisive encounters of the Third Crusade, not merely for the tactical brilliance displayed on the field, but for the profound political, military, and psychological repercussions that followed. While the battle itself lasted a mere 17 minutes, the victory achieved by Richard the Lionheart reverberated throughout the Holy Land, reshaping the strategic landscape, influencing morale on both sides, and altering the trajectory of the crusade. Understanding the aftermath of Arsuf requires an exploration of the immediate consequences for both the Crusader and Muslim forces, the broader strategic shifts in the region, and the long-term legacy that this victory left on the campaign to reclaim Jerusalem. Immediately after the battle, the psychological impact on both armies was profound. For the Crusaders, victory at Arsuf was a morale-boosting triumph that validated Richard's leadership and the discipline of his troops. The Crusader army had endured weeks of harassment, fatigue, and uncertainty during their march along the coastal plain. Constant attacks by Saladin's cavalry had tested their patience and endurance, and many had feared the possibility of being overwhelmed by a numerically superior foe. Yet the successful execution the disciplined charge and the rout of Saladin's forces reinforced confidence in Richard's command and demonstrated that careful planning, cohesion, and timing could overcome even overwhelming odds. Soldiers who had been fatigued and anxious were invigorated, their loyalty to Richard solidified, and their morale elevated for the challenges ahead. The victory also had a significant impact on Crusader strategy. Arsuf secured the coastal route from Acre to Jaffa, a critical supply line that ensured the Crusaders could maintain communication, receive reinforcements, and transport supplies by sea. Controlling this route was essential for the continuation of the crusade, as overland logistics were fraught with danger and prone to disruption by Saladin's forces. By stabilizing the coastal flank, Richard not only protected his army from further harassment during movement, but also established a secure base from which to plan subsequent operations, including the push toward Jerusalem. In strategic terms, Arsuf marked a turning point. The Crusaders could now operate with greater freedom and confidence, knowing that one of the most vulnerable approaches had been defended and controlled. For Saladin and his forces, the consequences were equally significant, though in the opposite sense. The defeat at Arsuf demonstrated the limitations of harassment tactics when faced with disciplined troops and decisive leadership. While Saladin's army remained numerically superior and maintained control over much of the interior terrain, the loss undermined the psychological advantage he had cultivated. His forces had relied on continuous skirmishing to demoralize the Crusaders and force them into a vulnerable position. The rout at Arsuf shattered that plan and forced Saladin to reassess his approach to engaging Richard's army. Reports from contemporary chroniclers suggest that Saladin was frustrated by the unexpected effectiveness of the Crusader charge and the unyielding discipline of the knights, highlighting the difficulty of defeating an opponent who combined strategic patience with the ability to exploit enemy vulnerabilities. The aftermath of Arsuf also influenced broader regional alliances and perceptions. News of Richard's victory spread quickly among both Christian and Muslim territories. For the Crusader states and European supporters of the Third Crusade, the triumph was a much-needed boost, signaling that the campaign had the potential to achieve significant military successes despite earlier setbacks, such as the protracted siege of Acre. For Muslim leaders and communities, the defeat served as a reminder of Richard's tactical brilliance and the effectiveness of heavily armored, disciplined troops in set-piece engagements. While Saladin remained a respected and capable commander, Arsuf demonstrated that even his formidable forces could be challenged and defeated under the right circumstances. This shifting perception influenced negotiations, military planning, and morale in the weeks and months that followed. One of the most immediate consequences of the battle was the stabilization of the Crusader army. Prior to Arsuf, continuous harassment had caused fatigue, reduced efficiency, and threatened the cohesion of the troops. After the victory, the army was able to regroup, resupply, and reorganize with renewed confidence. Richard used the momentum of the triumph to reinforce his strategic position, establishing strong defensive positions along the coastal plain and preparing for further operations. The soldiers' morale, once tested by fatigue and uncertainty, was restored, allowing the Crusaders to maintain cohesion and readiness for future battles. This restored confidence was crucial for sustaining the campaign and maintaining the initiative against Saladin, who had been attempting to dictate the pace of engagement through harassment and maneuver. In addition to its immediate tactical and operational consequences, the victory at Arsuf had symbolic and propaganda value. Richard the Lionheart's reputation as a military genius and fearless leader was cemented by the triumph. Stories of the decisive charge, the discipline of the Crusader knights, and the rout of Saladin's numerically superior forces circulated widely, inspiring awe and admiration throughout Christendom. The psychological impact on both allies and adversaries extended beyond the battlefield, influencing perceptions of Richard's authority and the credibility of the Crusader cause. For European audiences, the victory reaffirmed the righteousness and potential success of the Third Crusade, generating increased support, resources, and recruitment for the ongoing campaign. However, the victory at Arsuf was not without limitations. While it secured the Crusaders' coastal route and bolstered morale, it did not immediately lead to the recapture of Jerusalem, the ultimate objective of the crusade. Saladin's army remained intact, retaining significant strength and the ability to continue resisting the Crusaders in the interior regions. The battle demonstrated that even a decisive tactical victory could not, on its own, achieve strategic objectives without sustained pressure, planning, and follow-up operations. Richard's challenge was now to capitalize on the momentum gained at Arsuf while contending with the logistical, geographical, and political complexities that defined the Crusader campaign in the Holy Land. Arsuf also had a profound impact on the conduct of medieval warfare. The battle showcased the effectiveness of disciplined formations, timing, and combined arms in achieving a decisive outcome, even when facing a numerically superior foe. It underscored the importance of leadership, morale, and psychological warfare in determining the results of engagements. Military historians often highlight Arsuf as an exemplary case study in the interplay between preparation, patience, and decisive action, illustrating principles that would inform military thinking for centuries. Richard's ability to coordinate cavalry, infantry, and archers while maintaining morale and timing the engagement perfectly remains a benchmark for tactical excellence. Finally, the victory at Arsuf reshaped the strategic narrative of the Third Crusade. The battle demonstrated that the Crusaders could stand toe-to-toe with Saladin's forces and emerge victorious under the right conditions. It bought time for further operations, established a secure logistical route, and reinforced confidence among Crusader leaders and troops. Yet it also highlighted the complexity of the campaign. While victory in a single engagement could yield significant advantages, achieving the ultimate objective of Jerusalem required sustained effort, coordination, and negotiation. Arsuf, therefore, represented both a triumph and a reminder of the broader challenges of the Crusade. In conclusion, the aftermath of the Battle of Arsuf was multifaceted, encompassing immediate tactical, operational, and psychological consequences, as well as broader strategic and symbolic implications. Richard the Lionheart's victory stabilized the Crusader army, secured critical supply lines, and reinforced morale, while simultaneously undermining Saladin's strategy and challenging the perception of his invincibility. The engagement demonstrated the power of disciplined troops, coordinated strategy, and decisive leadership, leaving a legacy that would influence both contemporary and future military thought. Although the ultimate objective of Jerusalem remained unfulfilled, Arsuf marked a turning point in the Third Crusade, illustrating the transformative impact of a well-executed tactical victory and cementing Richard's reputation as one of the most skilled commanders of the medieval era. The Battle of Arsuf, though lasting only 17 minutes in its climactic phase, left an enduring legacy that transcends the immediate tactical victory achieved by Richard the Lionheart. Its significance extends beyond the Third Crusade, serving as a timeless study in military strategy, leadership, and battlefield psychology. The engagement exemplifies how careful preparation, disciplined execution, and decisive action can allow a smaller, well-organized force to overcome a numerically superior opponent. By examining the lessons of Arsuf, one can glean insights not only into medieval warfare, but also into universal principles of leadership, decision-making, and the interplay between morale, strategy, and execution in high-stakes scenarios. One of the most striking aspects of Arsuf's legacy is the demonstration of the power of disciplined forces operating under competent leadership. Richard the Lionheart's ability to maintain cohesion during the arduous march along the coastal plain exemplifies the value of preparation, organization, and training. Unlike Saladin's mobile cavalry, which relied on harassment and maneuver, Richard's army depended on structure, clear command hierarchies, and mutual trust between units. The precise coordination of knights, infantry, and archers during the decisive charge highlights how a disciplined force, even if numerically inferior, can generate a force multiplier effect that amplifies its combat power. This lesson resonates through military history. Discipline, cohesion, and training often outweigh sheer numbers when combined with decisive leadership and sound strategy. Another key legacy of Arsuf lies in the critical importance of timing in military operations. Richard's restraint during weeks of harassment, followed by the perfectly timed charge, illustrates that the moment of action can be as significant as the action itself. By waiting for the optimal conditions, enemy fatigue, overextension, and exploitable gaps, Richard maximized the impact of his forces. The lesson here extends beyond medieval warfare. Strategic patience and situational awareness are crucial in any competitive or high-stakes environment. Acting too early can squander advantages, while acting too late can allow opportunities to slip away. Arsuf demonstrates that effective leadership involves not just courage, but also the wisdom to discern when to act. The psychological dimension of the battle also contributes significantly to its legacy. Arsuf was not merely a physical confrontation, it was a battle of morale, perception, and confidence. Saladin's harassment tactics had been designed to frustrate, fatigue, and intimidate the Crusaders. Yet, the sudden and coordinated Crusader charge shattered the psychological advantage that Saladin had sought to cultivate. Panic spread rapidly among his forces, highlighting how morale, fear, and perception can influence the outcome of engagements as profoundly as swords and arrows. This principle remains relevant in modern contexts, whether in military strategy, competitive business environments, or crisis management. Leaders who understand the psychological state of their teams and opponents can leverage it to create decisive outcomes. Arsuf also underscores the enduring significance of terrain and positioning in warfare. Richard's use of the coastal plain, with the sea protecting one flank and the careful observation of enemy movements, allowed him to convert the environment into a strategic advantage. The battle demonstrate that understanding and exploiting terrain is not merely about physical positioning. It involves anticipating how the landscape affects mobility, supply lines, lines of sight, and the psychological confidence of troops. Commanders and leaders, ancient and modern, can draw lessons from this aspect. Successful strategy often requires the integration of environmental factors into operational planning, turning natural advantages into decisive outcomes. The engagement further solidifies the notion that leadership is both a personal and a strategic quality. Richard's presence on the battlefield, his calm decisiveness, and his direct involvement inspired confidence and maintained discipline among the troops. Leadership, in this sense, is not only about issuing orders, but also about embodying the qualities that a team or army must emulate under pressure. Richard's courage and strategic foresight created a sense of certainty among his soldiers, allowing them to execute complex maneuvers under intense stress. This dual role of leadership, personal example and strategic guidance, remains a cornerstone of effective command in military, corporate, and organizational contexts. Another lasting lesson from Arsuf is the efficacy of combined arms and coordinated action. The battle demonstrated the value of synchronizing different types of forces to achieve a unified objective. Knights, infantry, and archers each played a complementary role in the charge, ensuring that the Crusader attack was not just a frontal assault, but a multi-dimensional strike that overwhelmed the enemy. Coordination and integration of diverse elements are crucial in any complex operation. In modern military theory, business strategy, or large-scale project management, the principle remains the same. Aligning specialized units or teams toward a common objective magnifies effectiveness and increases the likelihood of success. Arsuf also highlights the interplay between preparation and adaptability. While Richard meticulously prepared his army and maintained discipline during the march, he also adapted to the immediate circumstances of the battlefield. The decision to charge was not preordained. It arose from careful observation of enemy movements, terrain advantages, and the readiness of his own troops. The combination of planning and adaptability enabled Richard to exploit a fleeting opportunity in a manner that was decisive. In contemporary terms, this reflects the importance of strategic flexibility. Rigorous planning provides the foundation, but the ability to respond to changing circumstances determines ultimate success. The legacy of Arsuf extends beyond tactical and strategic lessons to broader historical and cultural influence. Richard's victory enhanced the prestige of the Crusader forces and reinforced the legend of his military prowess. It demonstrated that European forces could engage effectively in the Levant, providing a template for subsequent campaigns and influencing the morale and expectations of both Christian and Muslim populations. Saladin, despite the setback, continued to be respected as a brilliant and capable commander, highlighting how individual battles can shape reputations without necessarily determining the broader course of war. Arsuf thus illustrates the complex interplay between individual battles, reputation, and the momentum of larger campaigns. Finally, Arsuf serves as a powerful illustration of the disproportionate impact a single, well-executed engagement can have on a broader campaign. 17 minutes of decisive action secured strategic positions, boosted morale, and forced the enemy to reconsider his plans. This lesson underscores that quality of action often outweighs quantity a well-timed, expertly executed operation can achieve. Results far beyond what numbers alone might suggest. For historians, military scholars, and strategists, Arsuf is a vivid reminder that success often hinges on the convergence of preparation, leadership, morale, timing, and coordination. In conclusion, the legacy of the Battle of Arsuf is multidimensional. It is a testament to Richard the Lionheart's tactical genius, the discipline and cohesion of the Crusader army, and the enduring principles of leadership, timing, and coordination. The battle illustrates how preparation, patience, and decisive action can overcome numerical inferiority, how psychological factors influence outcomes, and how terrain and combined arms contribute to success. Beyond its immediate historical impact on the Third Crusade, Arsuf remains a masterclass in military strategy, offering lessons that extend far beyond the medieval battlefield. In just 17 minutes, Richard the Lionheart transformed a potential vulnerability into a historic triumph, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire, educate, and illuminate the enduring principles of leadership and strategy.